This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Malick Hour, a celebration of the life and work of American filmmaker Terrence Malick. Hello everybody and welcome to the Malick Hour. This is the episode dedicated to the New World, and I'm delighted to have as my guest a close friend of mine and somebody who's been a companion on this Malick journey, Hugo Emerzeil. Have I pronounced your name correctly, Hugo?
Hugo Emerzeil is all right.
Oh, perfect. Wow. Because our friendship was always based on first name terms.
Exactly. Well, I'm happy to be here, John.
Hugo is a Dutch journalist and writer and podcaster. We've met, I can't remember how many years ago. It must be 3 or 4 years ago at least.
I think way longer, to be honest. I think it was 2019. Well, that's actually 5 years ago. Also not that long.
With COVID in the middle, anybody I met pre-COVID, it feels like a decade ago by now.
Exactly. Different life.
Absolutely. And you wanted very specially to talk about the New World. So I'm kind of interested in why this was because I know you're a Malick fan generally, but why was this a specific film you said, I put a pin in that one for me, I want to talk about that?
For me, I guess because it's the film where everything comes together in a way that really speaks to me. This is the Terrence Malick film where you can see all of his formal strategies that he has developed for his later films, which I love a lot as well, really come into place. Simultaneously, for me, it's his most romantic film, his most melodramatic film. It's a film that always makes me cry at the end, just the final sequence of what is it, maybe 30, 20 minutes just always gets to me. There's a sense of awe and wonder that is in all of the cinema of Terrence Malick, but you feel it very acutely in this film, maybe because it presents such a huge clash, of course, between this relatively short-lived, almost paradise-like Eden conditions that our protagonists find are in, and the grim reality and the political underpinnings of that tying that all together. There's just such a sense of tragedy and melodrama that seeps through this film. In particular, really gets to me. And then you have these natural landscapes, these wonderful locations, and the way that the camera treats it, the way that the music approaches it, the way that the sets are built. Well, I think we're already, summarizing this entire podcast episode, but all of these things together make this just such a magical film for me. And I remember seeing it for the first time when I was maybe 18. And it made a tremendous impact on me then, and I've rewatched it many times ever since. And every time I feel I grow along with the film, and my appreciation of the film is still only growing. I saw it a month ago again for maybe the 7th time or so. And again, I was crying at the end.
One of the things that I have to ask as well is, which have you seen all the different cuts? Because there are 3 extant cuts. I just wanted to ask you about that as well.
I think I have, and maybe I have a kind of a contrarian take here, but I always really like the theatrical cut because of its, let's say, density. I like it that these extended versions, they do linger more on certain characters or some natural phenomenon in the landscape. But I did kind of like the cohesion of the theatrical cut a lot, because ultimately this is also a film where I'm very invested in the emotional and romantic relationship of the main characters, of Christian Bale's and Colin Farrell's character, but also of the, let's say, plight of Pocahontas as she gets incorporated into this colonial regime almost of the British settlers. So everything where this plot kind of like really snaps into place, I'm also very interested in. So that's maybe why I prefer the theatrical cut still.
So just to give everybody the background, the first cut of the film was premiered before New Year to give it a sort of Oscar possibility of an Oscar run. And it was premiered on the basis that New Line, who had produced the film, they wanted cuts. So you can have this premiere with your cut, but we're going to go back in the editing suite and we're going to cut 15 minutes out or 20 minutes out or whatever it was. That then produced. Mark let me get his name correct. Mark Yoshikawa, one of the four editors on the film, he tells a story of how he was at the premiere of the film and everybody was saying, this film is perfect, don't touch a frame, it's just absolutely perfect. And he had been sitting in the premiere writing notes about what he thinks can go for the 15 minutes that he's going to pull out of the film ultimately, with Malick's full cooperation, and he has a full say on this. Then that subsequent cut is the theatrical cut that we were talking about, and it's the one I've seen most recently. I watched it last night in preparation for this podcast. And then there was a sort of extended European cut, which was finally released with all the cuts on a Criterion, and the extended version is a good deal longer. I think it might be anything from 30 to 40 minutes longer. It includes title cards a la Barry Lyndon, and feels more novelistic in a way. And
that is true.
It sort of makes sense in that sense. I'm with you. I like them all, but I would watching the theatrical cut yesterday, it's strange to say, especially for the New World, which has been criticized for its sort of long ears and what, but it feels snappy. It feels like it does. You really go.
It really feels snappy. This compression of the timeline is just, I think, so adamant to this film. I was referring to the ending of the film, which is just such a distinct experience of having the feeling of being swept up into this movement, really elegiac. And the way that the film kind of like eases into that, and suddenly you're in the midst of that. It really works when everything before that isn't overstaying its welcome in any way whatsoever. The opening of the film, when, at first you see the Native Americans, being completely one almost with the landscape. This is their own version of Eden, maybe. And then the ships, of course, arrive. The English settlers are arriving to the shores of what will be their new Americas. And there already, so many things have been established in such a short time that if you would take these extended cuts and you take this entire middle part, which kind of lingers, which kind of explores, like you say, in this novelistic way, all of these various strands and ideas and characters to much more detail, I think it kind of takes away some of the momentum of what the film is actually trying to do. So yeah, this theatrical one is maybe the perfect one for me.
There's even a sense a little bit that, I mean, you were referring to the sort of the final 20 minutes. I've got a feeling what you're referring to is probably 5 minutes of film time. It just feels like...
Can you imagine?
Yeah, it feels like it's 20 minutes, but because it's dealing with so many things happen and so many plots are resolved, but they're really done with like one line. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the meeting with Captain Smith and Pocahontas after all this time, even in a Ridley Scott movie, that would be a full scene. That would be like a back and forth, which would take 3 or 4 minutes. In this, it's like 2 lines. They literally go, "Did you find your Indies, John?" "No, I think I sailed past them." And that's the point in which I burst into tears because she says John, and I immediately relate it to myself. There's a couple of things. Let's go back to the beginning first.
Yeah, let's do that.
First of all, otherwise we really are topsy-turvy with this new world. First of all, this comes after the Thin Red Line. 1998, we have the Thin Red Line. He's already had 20 years off, so to speak, or when he's been the famous hiatus. This script was already written before Badlands. and had been Jack Fisk knew of it, and it was called The Mother of Us All. But this idea of a script about Pocahontas and Captain Smith, like a historical romance, was already there.
Yeah, I want to interject here and say that I didn't know that, and that I learned about this through your book, and I was absolutely fascinated by that idea of how these gestating projects of Malick, what might have, changed also over the course of all these decades before the film finally comes to fruition, but also, let's say, the emotional involvement then of the director and screenwriter when finally making the film. If you've spent such a long time with these characters, with these stories, with these environments, in your mind, basically, some maybe always occupying a little bit of space at the back of your mind, how tremendous it must be then to finally make this film. So when I was rewatching it, with this in mind, John, it completely transformed the experience as well. We're talking a lot now about Megalopolis and Francis Ford Coppola and this film that he was walking around with for 40 years as well, if not longer maybe. But it's just absolutely insane to realize that this was a film that he wanted to make for such a long time, and then he finally managed to do it.
It's really interesting as well if you sort of compare it. That means that in the chronology of his filmmaking career, this doesn't necessarily come after Thin Red Line. It actually could come before Days of Heaven. So Days of Heaven and this film kind of have these similarities in which they're sort of star-crossed lovers,
Exactly.
If he made this before Thin Red Line, for instance, you would see a continuation, which was, this is an American story set in America about the origins of America, and as a European imperial sort of project as well, if you want to put it in those ways. And that's kind of what he's been doing all along in his career. If you go Badlands, Days of Heaven, The New World, he's been making films about lovers against his very distinct historical context, the 50s, the beginning of the 20th century, and then the beginning of Jamestown and Virginia.
Plus, if you take all of the three of these romances, all three of them ultimately end up to be founded on some kind of lie as the romantic organizing principle that at first brings these lovers potentially more together, but eventually also tears them apart. I mean, obviously in Badlands, you have Kid who kind of like takes his lover on the run and basically creates a false sense of safety for her that she has to ease into. Then you have in Days of Heaven, of course, this whole conceit, this plot to pretend to be brother and sister so these two lovers can easily like mingle into this farm environment and approach also the farm, the main farmer and try to acquire his wealth. And then here in this film, you have Captain Smith who has to go on with his colonial project and basically creates a false narrative that he has died overseas so that Pocahontas will not wait for him. It's very interesting how all these three films have that similar dynamic between a man and a woman and between basically the man creating the story about basically life and the world that this woman then has to almost reside in, almost by force. Very sad.
Yeah, it's a marvelous way of looking at that, Hugo. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it because Malick is often seen as this sort of misty-eyed sort of guy who's looking at clouds and birds and stuff. But even here, it's a very sort of hard-eyed look at the world where romantic love is often grounded or betrayed by some sort of property-based self-destruction. I mean, like,
exactly.
Even into the Ben Affleck film with Olga Kurylenko, there's this sense that they're constantly moving houses. They're constantly in these sterile new American houses that can't contain her as this European spirit of sometimes kind of obvious mental health issues and other times, just wild life.
Yeah, exactly. No, and this is also, now I'm just showering you with compliments, but if there's one thing that I really took away of the book, John, it is this sense of groundedness that is actually so incredibly present in all of Malick's films. How it relates to his own biography, how it relates to his outlook on life, how many of the plot points or storylines or let's say moods and sentiments in the films are steeped in, like you say, practical realities. This is so fascinating to me. And then if we apply it immediately now to the New World, where you have, let's say, this political economic reality that is constantly interjecting what could have been one of the most beautiful, romances in the history of mankind. At least as it is presented in this film, because obviously historians have had, let's say, dissenting out views on what the relationship between Captain Smith and Pocahontas was. But he chose to show it as a romance so that it could be broken up by these political economic realities that are constantly in the way, that are constantly fighting for your intention, that are basically pulling on your sleeve, like gnawing almost at the foundation of what makes the film so beautiful. And that's also a very jarring viewing experience. Like, for instance, in the New World, when Captain Smith, for the first time, is completely immersed in this Native American tribe, but then is also forced back into a new exile, back into the settlement that he had left. And he walks into the gates of what will be Jamestown, and it's a squalid place, and it's winter, it's muddy, it's nasty. You have these annoying brats, these boys running around, scrawny dogs.
There was a leg in the bed. There was a leg in the bed. What you said? There was a leg in the bed. There's a leg in the bed. They have this chatter.
Do you believe in ghosts, Mr. Captain Smith?
Yeah, they're wonderful, those kids. All of a sudden, he's attacked by like 5 ghosts of Linda Manns.
Exactly. It's so jarring, and it's such a disconcerting moment for me every time that I watch that film. And that is, that there's something, like you say, when we talk about Malickian stuff, we often think about these very, let's say, either very poetic or for some people very pretentious, like forms of style or little motives. But this is very Malickian as well, this tension between something that humans can create or experience that is cosmic, because love can be cosmic, growing up can be cosmic, actualizing yourself can have such a weight to it. And then feeling all of those things being, grounded or put into arrest almost. That is a very Malickian move. And this film has a lot of those.
Absolutely. And when John Smith arrives, he arrives, you're under a cloud, Smith, says Christopher Plummer.
Yes.
He arrives in chains and he's going to be hung. And there's this, I love the way that Christopher Plummer, playing Captain Newport, at various points turns up and just solves problems by going, do you have anything against him? No? Okay, you can go now. And it's just like, wait a minute, that was a life and death moment. And he's just using this sort of noblesse oblige to send people on their way and to resolve difficulties, and it shows you how much power is kind of improvised and fickle. It's just like
exactly. I just wanted to say everything there. It's all such an improvisatory nature. It's all of it is so desperate. I mean, obviously these English men, they are mostly surviving by the craze of Pocahontas and her tribe, because she's the one that during the harshest winters decides to give them food, to give them fur, so that they can survive the cold, so that they have something in their stomach except for the rancid or, poor meals that they can.
Or cannibalism. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, this is one of the things that I want to really point out here, is that he really, and I don't think he gets enough credit for this, he really turns the whole of the myth of European settlers or European civilization on its head.
Exactly.
The English are the cannibals, not the natives, so to speak, not the Oloquin.
No, it's really, really, really fucking grim. But there's this kind of makeshift, kind of flimsy quality to everything that they try to establish there it's also sometimes very gratifying to see, of course. And then Christopher Plummer fucks off, goes back on some ship because they need, reinforcements and new material back from England. This kind of like back and forth there, these axes of power as well that kind of seep in and out of the picture. Yeah, it's very interesting because it opens up these narrative pockets for this thing that I was talking about earlier to actually arise. And this is, for me, very interesting how this film is constructed around these things, that there's the tight plot that it has still so many loose ends, or that just kind of like decays in on itself. And then in those pockets, this thing, the real heart of the story can arise. And this push and pull between those two things, it's magnetic. It's like riding waves. It's really, it doesn't even feel linear. Again, a compliment, but when you write this in the book, that what Malick often creates is an immersive type of cinema. And that's a cliche word, and it's often misused, but it is very much true that he creates a world to inhabit, and that the plot is secondary to it, but it is needed to give you the sense that you are part of that world, right? And for me, this is one of the films of his where he succeeded the most in actually doing that. I feel like I am there. I am like localized into it, and my heart is into it, but my body as well. So this immersive experience of the New World, what can I say? It's just incredible.
Yeah. I mean, when he goes in, there are several points where the New World is something which, a little bit like the Thin Red Line, is bigger than we are.
Yes.
I mean, the grass is huger than we are. It's taller, and you have to go through the grass, and you can encounter potential threats, or you can encounter this woman who you see in the distance, like the fox in The Little Prince, is just sort of in the midst of the grass. And then he's sent up the river to treat with the king. But that expedition becomes a little bit like Werner Herzog's Aguirre, that he's trotting along in his conquistador armor with his musket and his lance, and his sword like a needle, and he's just hopelessly, and this is what you say about narrative ellipses as well. We never really find out what happens to those people, because he goes off with a boat full of people, and then he's with three people, then he's with just two people, and then he's on his own. And I mean, apparently there were scenes which were cut, and you do see Ben Chaplin's hand being passed when finally Captain Smith is delivered to the king. But it's just, again, there's something about the density of that, and it really doesn't matter what happened in terms of the story. What matters more is, how does it feel like to be like a spaceman on this new planet where everything around you is hostile?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's funny because Aguirre used to be one of my favorite films when I was like a budding cinephile, when I was like, I think 15, 16, 17. I had seen that for the first time on a small CRT TV that I had in my bedroom. It was really small. And it fitted the film very well with its 4:3 frame, of course, as well. But I was very much taken aback by just, let's say, the gusto of going into the jungle. Obviously, this nightmarish vision as well of greed and lust and this sense of power, this perverted energy that basically pervades through the entire film. But seeing the New World and putting them next to each other is very interesting, because everything in the end that makes Aguirre maybe ultimately a less interesting film in its, let's say, cyclical linearity, it's kind of like very bleak and pessimistic and cynic outlook on humanity as well. I feel like the New World complements it or puts another perspective against it.
Yeah, I think that happens as well with the sense of sort of female sacrifice. I mean, Aguirre is a film which is, dominated by men, and the only women in it are the women who are utterly under the control of men, in terms of like his daughter, who he wishes to incestuously marry, something which obviously has taken on a new sort of disturbing light, considering what we now know about Klaus Kinski and his abuse. But here, John Smith is saved by Pocahontas, who's never named in the film, which I think is another interesting
No.
subversion. And I think the title as well. There were lots of Native Americans acting in the film who were very wary of the film because of the title. They didn't like the idea of the New World. But I think the film, by the end of it, there's a very good argument for looking at the New World being England as seen through Pocahontas's eyes
Yes.
rather than
Exactly.
America.
No, this is such a beautiful shift in the film as well, where, actually there's multiple shifts going on in this film that are very significant. Obviously, at first we feel like Colin Farrell's Captain John Smith is the protagonist of the film, and that we will experience this immersive world, this cinematic immersive world, mostly through his eyes. Then he meets Pocahontas, and it feels like we are gazing at this romance also through his heart, as if our heart is beating on behalf of his for her. But then when he has to sail off again on a new expedition, it is suddenly Pocahontas, who's played by Koreanka Kielker. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
I'm not going to dare to correct you, but yes, Koranka Kilka, I think is right.
Suddenly we find ourselves much more in her perspective, and then there's obviously another shift, which is that John Rolfe, Christian Bale's character, comes into play as a potential new suitor for Pocahontas. And it is true that the second half of the film is ultimately, and I have alluded to the end, of course, as well, the one that has maybe the most staying power, because it's the one that completely sucks you in. I think through, let's say, the wide-eyed, naive eyes of Colin Farrell and his yearning look, it's a perfect way to get introduced to a setting and a world and the characters and his outlook on them. But then ultimately in the film, at the end of the film, like you already mentioned, Have You Find Your Indies, John, he turns out to be somewhat insignificant in the end, in the grand scheme of things, because he is not the most important person here. Obviously, it was always her. And this is so fascinating as well. I think this is maybe, maybe you have an idea on this, John, and I think that maybe a film like To the Wonder definitely expands on this as well. But maybe this was the first time in, let's say, if we take the previous films of Malick, where the female character secretly really is the protagonist. But now I'm thinking this is actually also the case of Badlands, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and maybe also, of course, in Days of Heaven, where it's the young girl, it's her voiceover. So, but there's something so interesting about this. Like, he presents the male hero very often at first as the protagonist. I mean, it's Martin Sheen that we see in the opening shots of Badlands. It's Richard Gere that we see at the opening of Days of Heaven. It's Captain Smith that through which eyes we perceive what we think is the New World at the beginning of the New World. But then he always does this shift. He always strips that part of the story away and puts it into the perspective of his female characters.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's absolutely right. I think he's someone who is, I mean, the one big exception there is the Thin Red Line, where it's unavoidable
Obviously.
because it's a completely masculine
It's soldiers,
world.
it's boys. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. There's no sense of Terrence Malick being someone who is kind of not interested in women, or it's they're at the forefront from the very beginning as agents, and men are sort of superficially agents. They're the people who sort of kill each other. I mean,
Yeah.
Martin Sheen and Richard Gere are both sort of set up as murderers right from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Even though Bill, you could argue it's never clear if he's actually killed the first guy in the argument in the factory, or whether it's an accidental killing, or whether the guy's even dead. But it feels very much like he had.
It's gnarly. It's gnarly.
Yeah, he's not done a good thing. And you're absolutely right that the women, they seize the narrative, and they are much more influential as the films go on. I think as well there's a really interesting thing with Colin Farrell. I was watching The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling over the weekend, and you wouldn't imagine that I would be using this as a reference point.
Why not?
But why not? Exactly. And I was really struck by Ryan Gosling because I was thinking he is a really big film star and a really good action movie star, and he's bulked up a little bit for the film as well, who is giving a version of masculinity which is absolutely eschewing the macho and is absolutely eschewing any of those ideas, contradicting any of those ideas that to be masculine you have to be, humorless or muscle bound and just toxic if you want to use a cliche. And instead his whole version of masculinity is self-effacing and sensitive and emotion. I mean, there's one scene where he's sitting in a car and listening to Taylor Swift, and Emily Blunt goes, "Are you crying?" Just knocks on the window and says, "Are you crying?" to Taylor Swift. And she's like, no, I've got something in my eye. And it's lovely. It's a beautiful comic film, and it's a wonderfully done film. And I was thinking about this watching Colin Farrell and thinking, what an interesting version of masculinity Colin Farrell often exudes. It's, he's put in this leading male role, but his role is all about change and openness, and it's all about going into this community, and he's playing with them. And he's participating in their games, and he's being initiated into the tribe. And the problem is, it's based on deceit, because he knows this is only temporary for him. His version of Eden is going to be temporary.
It's so scary. It's so scary. This is such a scary part of the film, obviously, because at the beginning, maybe we want them to be together forever. We want to believe that this marriage almost between cultures, between worlds, between continents, but also between lovers can actually exist, because we need to believe maybe that it exists as well. And I'm sorry for being the person that is going to do that, but of course, who else but me? If we take Colin Farrell, not only in the New World, but in the film that was released around the same year, Michael Mann's Miami Vice, we see a picture of this actor and the characters that he portrays in sequence, basically, between those two films, in which he is so good at showing what it means to yearn, to have this vastness inside of him, this open space, this romantic wound that he can carry with him throughout the film. And this energy that it exudes, he can still convert it into action, because in the moments when he needs to, both in Miami Vice, but also in the New World, his characters, they rise to a occasion, or they try to fend themselves off from danger and harm. But deep from the inside, you know that he's being broken up by these fatalistic or these gigantic chance encounters that are so valuable, so huge. And this for me really makes the film much better as well, that he is the person that is conveying all of these things. Because in Miami Vice, it's Sonny Crockett, and he meets Isabella, the, let's say, partner in crime of the massively influential drug lord that they're trying to, in some way bust by doing a very ambitious and convoluted undercover cop situation with, factors on boats and speedboats, this and that.
Narrative is not Michael Mann's strong point, let's face it.
No.
Pieces and the sensation.
The set piece is the sensation and the sensuality of it, because
true.
Ultimately for me, Miami Vice is first and foremost a melodrama and not a crime film. And that is also because of the weight that Colin Farrell puts into it. So I see a strong overlap there, yeah. And it's true that he does it in a way that is, he has a kind of masculinity that he's, radiating, but it is not a cliched one, because it's a very vulnerable one.
Exactly.
It's a romantically very transparent one as well, because you can see it in his eyes all the time. In every single shot of the New World, but also in Miami Vice, you can see what he is thinking of, which is potentially the love of his life. When you find Captain Smith in the New World, trying to find these new indies. And he finds himself somewhere in, what is it, Antarctica or something?
Yeah, it's like Greenland or
Greenland. Yeah. He finds himself on the shores of some very icy, beach. And he's looking around, and obviously you see the disappointment of let's say, his failed quest, his failed expedition. But what you also read into it automatically again is him just being so incredibly sad because he's missing this woman in his life.
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazingly like the Tree of Life. It's amazingly cosmic and amazingly banal at the same time. It really is that I am on the shores of eternity and a million miles from the girl I love. And neither of those things in Malick, one of them is not more important than the other.
No, because this cosmic reality, which is, you could say, to some degree present in all of his films, can only, of course, exist by the virtue of all the banality existing, right? Because there's always has to be something that transcends it. So there has to be something to transcend even. But basically, you also, again, then need maybe that banality to bring it down, because if we're only, like you said, if we're only with our heads in the clouds, then what shape can the film have? How do you even construct it? And you see that this is a thing that obviously Malick had challenges with when he was constructing Voyage of Time, which is a film that has, let's say, almost no banality in it, but in that process also sometimes feels more shapeless or weightless than many of his other films. So this tension is, I would say, critical and maybe, let's say, essential and part of the DNA of the Malick oeuvre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I'd like to bring up, and this changes a little bit with each edition, but voiceovers is obviously something that he uses over and over and over again. In this version, it's an interesting departure because he uses like Captain Smith's own writing for his thing. So if you listen to the voiceovers where Colin Farrell is speaking, he's speaking this sort of diarist tongue, and when he's talking about this is a land where no man need go hungry, where we can all and there's a political idea of America there, a democratic idea in
this aspirational ideological construct almost.
Absolutely. We've got oysters as big as our hands over there, and in the extended version, that he has this thing of overlaying that with a sort of more internal dialogue. Even as he's writing his diary, you can hear what he's actually thinking. And this combines with some other choices, which I think Malick makes, which is really interesting, where he has quite a lot of people talking directly to camera. There's a scene where Eddie Marsan is sort of tormenting Captain Smith, and he's talking directly to camera, or Noah. Is it Noah Taylor, the actor who's shouting at the Indian, at the Algonquin? You don't own anything. How can you own this? And they're shouting these things. But even the character who's a sort of double turncoat, who first gives Captain Smith the power and then takes it away from him, when he goes off to steal Pocahontas, he says, conscience is a fly. And he's standing sort of looking directly at camera. And there's this, I don't know, it's a really interesting choice that he has these people almost like, are they talking to someone? Are they talking to us? Are they talking to themselves? There's always this confusion there.
It predates a little bit the let's say Fellini-esque construct of Knight of Cups, where it doesn't really matter where people are placed within a scene or in which location or environment people are talking with each other, or how the mise-en-scène is constructed around these dialogues, as long as the thing is being said that Malick needs to include in the film. It doesn't really seem to matter that much. Obviously it matters, but there seems to be some degree of freedom in the way that he can present those things. And it raises a lot of questions, because this is the first film where you really feel that, let's say, 360 immersive, let's say, lived in world, this immersive quality through Lubezki's cinematography as well, that really becomes, let's say the anchor or the foundation for all the Malicks in the 21st century so far. But so at the one end you have this, let's say, semi-objective or maybe just completely separated camera that has a will of its own, maybe, that can kind of like glide in and out of things. And then at the other end, you have these layers of subjectivity and this positionality of the main characters, their point of view, almost like, am I watching the things now through literally his eyes, or is it an approximation, or is it complementary, or is it opposing? Like, there's all of these ways that if you really overthink it, which is hard to do because the film kind of wants you to ease into the experience, so it's very hard to dissect those things. But if you really start thinking about it, it's hard to find a clear organizing principle that brings everything together from, let's say, a cinematographical and mise-en-scène point of view. Do you know anything about that, John? What some of the ideas were there?
I think when he's filming things, he definitely has that idea that he wants to shake things up all the time, and he doesn't care about traditional blocking. He doesn't care about they shot over 1 million feet of film, and Kodak awarded them with a magnum of champagne. And
amazing. That must have been a very delicious bottle of champagne, I can imagine.
Yeah. And they would basically run off into the fields or into the forest or whatever and start shooting on this set that was that as you said, I mean, they could literally move 365 degrees and there'd be nothing in shot except Jack Fisk's production design. And they'd planted trees and they planted things a year ahead so that everything would be grown to the right height and whatnot. And so they would create an enormous amount of footage. And what I find interesting is if you look at this and you look at Days of Heaven, to some extent Thin Red Line as well, there are so few scenes, you often get meaning built out of shots rather than scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Things aren't happening in a sort of, this is happening now in a continuous 1.5 minutes of continuous time in this place that the cameras are there and are just catching. Here's something that happened 5 seconds in this place. Here's something that happened 5 seconds in a totally different place at a totally different time. Here's something that happened, and so that the kidnapping of Pocahontas is a good example of this. That journey up the river, discussion with the chief about the kettle, taking Pocahontas back, telling Pocahontas that Captain Smith is actually not at the camp because he's been imprisoned and now he's doing hard labor on the periphery. All of that takes place with discontinuous sort of, it doesn't happen with one scene or one explanation. There's no exposition in that way. You're just snatching meaning from glimpses and words said and lines delivered here or there and everywhere. So I think that freedom is a kind of, it's almost like he used to call it Terrence Malick used to refer to it as a sort of Rubik's Cube approach, where he would have different squares of different colors all over. And, his editing suites, he had 4 different editors working on this. And one of the things he used to do, to the annoyance of the 4 editors, he would break up the film and they would work on different sections of the film. And then they would all look at it together and have suggestions and whatnot. And he has his own language for different shots. This shot does this shot does that. And he calls them, this is a bevel and this is a this or that. And one of the things that annoyed them is he befriended some guy who was hanging around the set who was just like into mushrooms or something. And he said, oh, why don't you come in and have a look at, sit at an editing desk and have a look and see what you think of the film and you can make some suggestions and things. And he was just fiddling about. And the editors were saying, well, who is this guy? And he's like, oh, no, I just, And they were kind of really, peeved with him. But that guy actually came up with the idea when Captain Smith is about to be killed and she jumps in front of him. There's a shot of a sail unfurling.
Yeah.
And it's like the idea of, I'm about to go on my final journey, I don't know. That's my reading. You can take any reading, but it's a real disconcerting jump outside of the moment.
And you mention it, and I immediately experienced like the haptic, the sensual quality of seeing that shot. You know, it's like it's such a tiny thing, but it stands out so clearly, so specifically. And there's many of those little moments, these little cutaways, these weird focuses on things that it's hard to piece them all back together, and completely explain what the reason is for them to be there, except for giving you this experience, for giving you that feeling,
and that
you can actually think about that.
And that was this suggestion by this guy who was a completely outsider, had nothing to do with the film and all the rest of it. It's certainly not a trained editor or anything.
Amazing.
And so that's a sort of freedom. There's another scene in which there's lightning, and you can see sort of the Koryanka Kilka sort of almost turning to the camera to go, "Whoa! Did you guys see that?" And that's in there as well. There's a scene where she is with Christian Bale, and they're sort of planting stuff in the mud. And the day they were shooting this, she was very ill. And she falls over, and if you watch it closely, she's actually out. I mean, she doesn't just fall over; she's kind of lost consciousness. And then Christian Bale can't stop laughing, and he picks her up, puts her over her shoulder, and carries her around. All of that was just totally what was happening to the actress. It wasn't really a rehearsed scene or anything like that. They were just like, "You guys work in this field, and we'll film you." But that stays in the film because it's natural, because it's accidental, because it has that flavor of accident to it. And what do you want when you're filming people who are supposed to be going about their daily life and daily work on a farm? You want to see them, nothing dramatic happens, you know? They're just planting stuff and getting water from the well, and so you have this sort of non-dramatic accidental nature to the film, which, even though we're watching sort of what a foundational myth of the creation of America, so to speak.
That's amazing. That's such a good story. I love those bits. It feels lived in, it feels texturally rich, it feels genuine, and you need that. You need those things to actually accept this vision, this idea that Malick has about humanity, about this potential of people to actually transcend themselves, to actually find something within our planet's ecosystem that is cosmic, that is bigger than anything that we actually know. So you need these snippets to actually accept this outlook on life, which is so beautiful and so grand and so, for me, also very precious. It's like I really can use Malick films very often as a way to mirror things of the way that I look at life, the way that I look at humanity, the way that I see the entirety of the world, which is very hard to do. So I put trust in him in these things as well. And I think these are the little things that that make him deserve that trust, that are ways for him to earn that from you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very interesting. I mean, I'm really interested in what you say about the second half of the film, and I want to sort of come back into that now that we're talking about Rolf. We see her grief as well about hearing, and when we work out instantly, we see the cruelty of that lie he's sort of done out of. I mean, he's not doing it out of wickedness on his part. He thinks she's a young girl, she'll get over me,
It's patronizing. He's basically taken away her agency to deal with his departure in a way that is real, and also constructs a version of himself that is literally bigger than life. So it's also very petty, and it comes from a place probably of insecurity, because his death will always be bigger than the fact that he is alive. It's the permanent loss. And by conveying that, maybe he also knows that he will be inside of her heart forever, because he knows that she's going to be inside of his heart forever. And that's nasty. That's, very toxic. And then, like you said, then you see her grief, and you process things through her eyes much more clearly. Again, some great shots of this kind of like semi-subjectivity, where it feels like you're really into the point of view of Pocahontas, with her, let's say, British lady, her mentor, her teacher, in the ways of how you go about being British, this coquettish kind of, wearing dresses, working on your handwriting, your penmanship, all these things, while being profoundly sad. And constantly also this push and pull for her between the old ways and incorporating the new ones. And then, exactly like you mentioned, that is obviously where the title comes in. This is the new world. This is a new reality that's being enforced on her. And she's so vulnerable. She's so broken. She's so sad. She doesn't even know how to resist it anymore.
Yeah, I think there's also, it really challenges our view of, it doesn't create a simple binary between, way of life for the Native Americans good, like Dances with Wolves does. Dances with Wolves is like, Americans, the cavalry and civilization and everything becomes bad, and every way the Native American life is portrayed is positive. This has a thing of like, yes, that was Edenic and it's terrible that it's been destroyed, but you can kind of understand why Pocahontas is sort of like interested in this stuff. Like, look at the way glass works, and look at the way this is new technology. This is me being, especially when she gets to England, this is me being fascinated by stuff I've never seen before, and in a sense having the same exploring spirit that Smith sometimes displays. I'm also interested what you think of sort of the Sam Shepard character in this, Christian Bale's John Rolfe.
Yeah, I find him very enigmatic and interesting because let's put it very frankly, he's very real. As in, he's also taken a fancy to Pocahontas. But it is a more measured approach. It is not the, cosmic clash or the cosmic kind of like intersection of two stars. It is something deep and profound, but it is also a bit more calculated, a bit more out of a place of intrigue almost. And not really a place of, let's say, complete violent alarming. And he's endearing and tragic, but he's also stern and somewhat traditional.
I don't think you know the meaning of the word.
Exactly. Exactly. No, but there is a gentleness. There seems to be a good, like, kind-heartedness to him that is very interesting. And it obviously comes to full fruition towards the end of the film, where he realizes that she can never really love him wholly as who he is if her heart is still promised to a man she believes to be supposedly dead. And then when she finds out that he is not, he arranges a meeting between Smith and Pocahontas so she can find out for herself once and for all what the nature of her heart still is, what the contents of her heart still tell her. And this is a very interesting moment, perhaps of, opportunism, but there's also a lot of humility in that, humbleness. So I find him a fascinating addition to the story. And you have to imagine, John, that like the first time, obviously, like many other people, maybe particularly of my generation, the first time that we heard of the Pocahontas story was through the animated Disney film, which for the sake of convenience leaves out the Sam Rolfe character wholesale. It is just Captain Smith and Pocahontas, a prince and a princess. That's it. So it's very interesting to see how this film wrestles with this, again, triangle, which so often comes back into Malick films as well. Both in Days of Heaven, Into the Wonder, here also in The New World.
It's funny as well how in both Days of Heaven and in this, the jealousy is kind of short-lived, and there is an element of a greater love for the person means you can't be jealous or possessive of them. You have to, as you say, arrange this meeting or given the society that existed at the time, allow this meeting. Also, it's interesting that Pocahontas, in terms of the racism of the time, she's considered a princess and therefore kind of
royalty.
Yeah, she's considered a prize and a prize marriage, a good marriage. It's not like, oh God, you've married a heathen. It's no, she's converted to Christianity and she is she's a member of royalty. And so it's actually an important marriage. And she gets invited by
the king and
queen, and the queen is played by Terrence Malick's wife, so that's lovely. Also, the king is played by Jonathan Pryce, which goes to show that when Malick comes calling, very big actors will come to just do basically a one scene role. I love that court scene. I think she looks amazing. The court looks like something out of a Peter Greenaway film. It has a really good lived-in quality again.
It's beautiful, and the chamber, this classical chamber music that's playing, it's so well constructed, and it's dreamlike, but also feels real and lived in. And it is, like you said, through her perspective that we're seeing the real New World, which is England, yeah. And there's these some of the shots, remind you of L'année dernière au Marienbad, with these perfectly pruned trees, these vast spaces on which you can project all these emotional underpinnings of the characters. And then this moment at court has just such a sense of fancy and wonder. It reminds me a little bit of when the circus troupe comes flying down in Days of Heaven. It has this kind of almost idiotic, clownesque, circus-esque quality to it as well. But
theatrical, isn't it? It's really theatrical.
Theatrical, it is.
And I mean, there's also a sense that, I love the journey to England as well. Again, so elliptical. They're on a boat, ready to go, and then they're there. You see water, and then they're there, and it's just so they're at the dock, and he cuts out all the unnecessary bits. There's no getting off the boat, sighting land, none of that. There's no the hardships of the journey. It's just it's like they're traveling through one of the dune sort of space navigators have taken them there. Also, you have Wes Studar's sort of role as the guy who's going to count the English and talk to God. And I'm going to notch my sticks. And I love...
Yeah, he's counting exactly. This is such an interesting perspective on things as well.
Because he's another explorer. He's another spaceman going to a different planet. I wanted to ask you one other thing. Is the music in this film is really interestingly sort of achronical, is that the right word? Anachronistic, I guess.
Achronistic, yeah. Yeah, of course, because it opens, of course, with the overture of Der Nibelunge of Wagner, which is, when I was, showing this friends as like a late teenager, when I was showing it to friends, I often showed the opening and would discuss as well that it is such a genius pick, because obviously we know the let's say the aura, the reputation of Wagner, and we know Der Nibelunge also as a complementary piece to the Nazi ideology and the way that this music is being incorporated into this world philosophy, this mindset that they have constructed for themselves through National Socialistic ideology. And the interesting thing is that it opens with such a pristine sense of wonder. If you would play this piece and you've never seen the film, you don't know anything about the piece either, it feels like a beginning. It feels like something arriving on the shore of a thing, right? It feels like the opening and the encounter of a thing, like a proper overture, of course, has to be. The point basically where that piece stops in the film is also the point where it becomes truly Wagnerian in its kind of like how we now associate it with these fascist qualities. So it's this exact right fragment that basically says everything. A new world, a new era, ships coming to the shore, lovers going to meet. All of it is already encapsulated in the music. And what I found very interesting, John, in your book is to read that the composer of the film was Howard Shore, right?
No, he's James Horner.
James Horner, yeah. That he was very frustrated with this process of composing this film, because Malick was basically just using all of these other pieces, achronistic pieces that had nothing to do with his individual score. And that if you would find the soundtrack album of The New World, you will find that it doesn't resemble at all what you listen to in the film in itself, because Horner's score is not that prominent in the film in itself, because there's a lot of, let's say, more canonical classical music in there. I find it genius, and I find it very beautiful, and I think it contributes to this dreamlike, intoxicating logic that the film has to project you into, so that you can transcend all of its borders together with these lovers, which is so essential, because then that, of course, also brings us ultimately to the end, which is, I would say, if I would take it like minute by minute, and maybe you're right, John, that it is much more compressed in time than you actually might think, because it feels so vast. But if you would take this 5 or 7 minutes, or in my experience, it feels like 20, maybe the best sequence ever put to film, for me at least, the one that I would like to revisit the most in my life, at least, that's for sure.
It's so tragic, and it's so well done, and yet it's also, it doesn't lean into the tragicness. There's an element, a very prominent element of joy to it. I'm thinking you lead into Rebecca's death with her playing, with her child.
Yeah, exactly.
And then again, the first time I and this has got to be one of those things I'm going to have to avoid doing, is rewatching Malick films and thinking, oh God, I could have put that in future edition maybe. But I realized that the end of this film is very much paired with the end of To the Wonder, where Olga Kurylenko wakes up in a field and you don't know where she is or what, and she's sort of moving towards the light and then turns around and a light shines on her face. And my reading of that, and according to the script, and according to life, this is what actually happened. She's dead, and this is her in the afterlife. And that you have the same sense. Pocahontas has got a wet dress, and getting a wet dress in this period of history is not a great idea,
No, but that all of his films are basically so concerned with mortality is a thing that you can kind of know, and maybe it's obvious, but in the way that you present it in the Magic Hours, it takes on a stronger meaning. It becomes a much more integral aspect, foundational aspect almost of his cinema. These reflections on the inevitability of mortality and how to process it, because, well, you can immediately relate it back to the lie of Captain John Smith, making himself larger than life by saying that he is death. And then at the end of the film, there's the true death, the real passing away of Rebecca / Pocahontas. But it's done in a way where it conveys something about life and mortality that is not only the cliche shot of somebody in their dying bed, Something else happens there. The film in itself tries to almost construct a passage as if the film is bringing you to that space, in the way that it's this cyclical montage, this sweep in music, and then in the end, of course, this tiny running stream, so fickle. And yeah, it's such a tremendous shot.
And the trees just moving, and it's just like
incredible.
Oh, that's so moving. And after all that music we've heard heard Mozart, we've heard James Horner, we've heard Richard Wagner, and we just are left with the sort of bird song and the creaking of the trees. I'm absolutely, it knocks me out as well. These final moments, and we talk about cinematography earlier. The fact that she's playing hide and seek with her child, and the camera loses her, and the child loses her, and her.
This is so tremendous. I like when I was recently rewatching it. That struck me as well so much. Like, Jesus, my God, that is such an ingenious and poetic and beautiful and painful way to depict this. Just somebody slipping out of this existence, whatever it already is, and then lost in this maze. Where are you? You know, this is like that's the quintessential Malickian move.
Yeah,
almost.
we're not playing anymore. Where
Yeah.
the game is over, you know, and also the final point about this for me is the voiceover that you get is John Rolfe writing a letter to his son in the future, and that
Exactly.
also sort of suggests that John Rolfe feels that he's not secure enough of his own life that he will be around to sit down and talk and communicate with his son about this. He wants to, or even that he'll be the same man. Maybe his feelings will have changed. Maybe he will have married again. So he wants to just freeze that moment and say, okay, me
Exactly.
now, I'm writing to you in the depth of my grief to you, you know.
Well, and this is the ultimate tragedy that is at the heart, maybe, of all of the films of Malick, is this tension between mobility and immobility, between the fact that like everything moves, often at a frenzied or at an uncontrollable pace. The camera moves, the plot moves, the colonial enterprise goes on. In the case of this film, you know, the lovers are on the run in Badlands. Things are like Ben Affleck's character constantly moving from house to house into the wonder. This impossibility of freezing things in time, that we are not capable of doing that in any way whatsoever, how badly we wanted to. This is again something that might seem very cliche or might be very apparent for some people, but to show it in such a succinct way, in such a poignant way, for me, it gets at the heart of what makes it difficult to live, what it means to be human, is exactly this. And I think it's the thing that most people, if they have the luxury to only struggle with these kind of things, struggle the most with those kind of things.
Maybe that's also what the trees represent to some degree as well. You've had the fickle stream, as you say, you have the flow of life, but you do have sustaining life as well. You do have something that's there and solid. Yeah, there's you know, there's a pantheism to this, and there's a symbolism, and there's an idea. Yeah, I mean, I can watch this as an atheist and feel that it's much bigger than me, and that life is much bigger than me as an individual, and feel the tragedy of that, but also the beauty and joy of it as well.
Well, you know, John, on a personal note, you know, I would say that I mean, what am I? I'm probably not an atheist, because I started praying, but I'm not praying for like a Christian God or something. But I occasionally now do go to church and sit down and actually pray, because maybe in an attempt to at least mentally freeze a thing in a moment. Maybe other people would, you know, call just meditating or something, but even though he has this Christian background, it's none of it is really steeped in only Christianity per se. It is just this acute awareness of what brings people into a spiritual crisis is probably the impossibility to grasp the finiteness of the things that they are going through. That's tremendously powerful and very humbling again. And I think he understands that to such a strong degree, which is why his films have such a strong focus on these existential questions like love, birth, mortality. Basically, the things that are the quintessential aspect of what it means to be a human being or be alive and think about these things.
I think on that note, that's a wonderful way of rounding up our discussion on the New World. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Hugo. It's so great to talk to someone so passionate about this film, and a film that kind of at the time was not as well regarded as it surely deserved.
I'm still trying to convince so many people that are into Malick films that this is the one, that this is the film for me at least. And whenever I show it to people, whenever I somehow succeed in letting people watch it, very often they agree with me. So I think this is a film that still needs to constantly be rediscovered, even though this is not a minor director. But I feel like this is one that is being kind of like left behind in more critical conversations too often, which is a shame, because I think, as we have indeed Well, Testified here is and Justified is what a tremendous piece of cinema this is. What a deeply humanist picture it is. How incredibly poignant and beautiful and sad it is. And having this conversation with you, John, and having read the book, even though I've seen the film a month ago, I wish I had the time today to just cancel all my plans and immediately put on The New World again.
You'll find time sometime this week. And one final note I'd like to add as well is there's so much bird song in this film, and the bird song he would source and go out and record. He's a big birder, as I'm sure you know. And there is a CGI shot, and it's of parrots which are extinct that would have been alive at the time, and which blend in. Nobody ever sees it.
Now we're nerding out too much, but that also complements, of course, Voyage of Time so much as well as this like anthropological interest that he has in natural phenomenon, and again, this enterprise of freezing things in time, which is ultimately what cinema, ironically, can do better than we can ever do, and that's maybe also why we need these movies in our lives. At least that's why I do.
I co-sign that statement. Thank you so much, Hugo. I wish you the best. Can't wait to talk again about such things.
John, it was such a pleasure, and I hope that for all the listeners that after hearing this, you'll go and find some time to watch The New World and also to read John's book, because it's tremendous.
Thank you so much.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.